What I'm asking you is, if they were anonymous, then how was it that everyone who had copies, which was tens of thousands by then, already knew who the authors were? That's all I want you to answer.
These deep authorships and discussions were happening across the Christian world at that time, which is, as you mentioned, Africa, Eastern Europe, and those many places that you get alluded to.
All right. Okay, brother. Hold on. Stop. So you didn't answer the question. What you're doing is hold on. Stop. Because what you're doing is you're spitballing here, right? You're not giving any proof that this is actually what happened. You're just saying it. All right. Joy Boy, what do you have to say, my brother? Do you have a statement to make? Do you first of all, you know what the topic is?
Yeah, I believe this topic was Jesus of God changed my mind.
Correct. Do you believe that you can change my mind?
Hopefully a bit, but not that much. Just a bit of discussion.
All right, go ahead. So I say, make your statement. Why do you think Jesus is not God? Because Da Vinci's been waiting for a while too, so I want to get to him. I'm gonna give you a few minutes. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So probably the biggest thing that pushes me away from claiming that Jesus Christ is God, or accepting the Christian claim that Jesus Christ is God, is mainly the lack of verifiable evidence. I believe that there's no verifiable evidence backing up that claim. Okay. It doesn't mean that I'm calling for the eradication of Christianity or anything like that. Mm-hmm. I simply believe that Christianity is just a spiritual belief like all other religions, which is fine and fair, but ultimately I don't believe there's verifiable evidence. So that's your main and pretty much only argument for believing that Jesus is not God, is what you're saying? Yeah, that's the foundation of it. Okay. So here's what I say. I actually have a debate brief, because this is some of the earliest this is one of the earliest arguments I've ever had when people are talking to me about Jesus Christ, right? So the claim, guys, is that there's no verifiable evidence that Jesus is God, or for Christianity, or whatever it is that they're saying. Now, they make that claim as if the entire foundation of Western history, ancient manuscripts, early creeds, martyrdom records, and fulfilled prophecy are just like a vague spiritual sentiment, right? So let's talk about what we have in reality versus what you say we don't have, all right? Now, let's talk about the eyewitness testimony. The New Testament was not written centuries later. It was actually penned by firsthand witnesses and their close companions. If we look at people like Dr. Richard Buckham, who is a professor at St. Andrews, he wrote a book called Jesus and the Eyewitnesses in 2006, right? And it is based upon the fact that the Gospels are based on direct eyewitness testimony. And guess what? These people went to their deaths for proclaiming Jesus as the risen Lord, and not as a symbol or myth, but as God incarnate. Now, you don't die for metaphors, right? You don't die for something that you actually know is false and then continue to die. Now, let's talk about that. Because if you're going to tell me that you are a person who can be skinned alive, or crucified upside down, or beheaded, or boiled in oil, and that's just a handful of the ways that these people were killed, and not a single one of them ever said that Jesus was not God, or that they didn't really witness the resurrection and things like that, you are out of your mind if you think that those guys all were enduring that torture for something that they knew was a lie. Secondly, we have something called manuscripts. We have 5,800 Greek manuscripts of the New Testament, many which are dating within decades of the original events, right? Far more than any other figure of antiquity. Any other figure in antiquity. Now, if we compare that to things like Julius Caesar's Gallic Wars, we have 10 manuscripts. 10 for Julius Caesar's Gallic Wars, right? Yet nobody questioned Caesar's existence, and you're questioning Christ's deity when his identity as God in the flesh is etched across manuscripts from P66 to Codex Sinaiticus, to Codex Vaticanus, and many others, right? To say nothing of the fact that we have hundreds of fulfilled prophecies. Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6 calls the coming Messiah mighty God, right? Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 and 14 sees one like a son of man receiving everlasting dominion, right? Which is language that's only reserved for Yahweh. Jesus quotes this of himself in Mark 14:62, which is why the Jewish court charges him with blasphemy. Not misunderstanding, blasphemy, right? They actually wanted to take his life for saying what he was saying. It's not a vague spiritual title. They knew what he was saying, and it was a death sentence, and he still said it, okay?
Now, to talk about creeds, in Philippians chapter 2, verses 6 through 11, right? It was a hymn dated to within 5 years of the resurrection, per scholars like Larry Hurtado and James Dunn, right? Says Jesus was in very nature with God, okay? According to two scholars who have spent decades studying the manuscripts, studying the history, studying the documentation. That's not centuries of legend creeping in. That's immediate recognition of his deity by the earliest followers. Now, what I find interesting is how so many atheists and Muslims will even still try to appeal to the distance of written manuscripts to the events of the crucifixion, and yet they'll look at things like the Quran, which came 7 centuries later, and somehow think that Muhammad had the authority to speak on something that he had no knowledge of. Hilarious to me. But lastly, even non-Christian historians will back this up, okay? If we look at Tacitus, who wrote the Annals 15.44, Santonius and Josephus, which were ancient historians, they all acknowledge that Jesus was worshipped as divine by his followers. Now, you can argue against him being God, but you absolutely cannot claim that there's no evidence that people believed he was God from when he still walked on the earth, right? So if you say that there's no evidence, my question to you, my brother, is, and I'm going to actually paste these into the chat for you, because it sounds more like you're kind of repeating things that you've heard or that you believe, but I don't think that you've actually looked and said, let me see if there is no evidence, right? You just said something or you heard something, and you looked at it through your own myopic lens and said that there was none. But that's very contrary to what history actually says. Now, I don't know. Are you still in here, Joy Boy?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm
okay.
just listening.
So does it make sense what I was saying to you?
It does make sense, but it seems very ironic because you flipped the script and talked to me about looking at it from a myopic view, but from what I'm seeing, you're mostly shifting around that view yourself. So right here, I had about 5 of your main key points that you addressed the topic that I talked about. You mentioned eyewitnesses, martyrdom, manuscripts, Old Testament versus linking, Jesus' divinity claims, the treason, the hymns that you had said are dated either to a few decades after Jesus' death or resurrection, the historians, so those are the main points that you mentioned. But when we take a closer look at scholarly consensus, when it comes to eyewitnesses, these are eyewitness claims. These are simply the disciples saying that they had seen the risen Jesus, believing that he was God. And I want to prove this by saying I'm not one of those people who believe that this Jesus was just a mythical creature, or mythical guy. No, I do believe that the historians have enough evidence to support that Jesus Christ was real. It was not a man who was just some cooked up version. It was a real human being who did inspire the Christian religion.
Right. That's not what the topic is. We know that Jesus existed. The question is, can you prove that? Can you convince me that he wasn't God?
I believe my argument may be that direction.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. So my biggest claim for Jesus not being God is that the lack of verifiable evidence points that there is no proper eyewitness accounts. The eyewitness accounts don't really matter. I think Jesus was Lord. You said that these people would have died for and believe that is a lie. So many Muslims, so many Hindus, and so many people of other religions before Christianity.
Wait, you said that you believe. Wait, what did you say? You believe that it's a lie? You don't believe that these people died? You don't believe that the apostles were killed? Okay,
I didn't say that.
Okay, your mic is kind of bad. That's why I'm asking.
Oh, my bad.
You're good.
You had mentioned the martyrdom of the disciples, essentially, as part of your first arguments. And I believe that that's not a really strong argument because martyrdom is found in almost every single religion and every single spiritual belief. Many people have died, including Christians, in the face of oppression of their beliefs. This has happened across millennia.
Sure.
We have evidence that it has happened before Christianity. We have evidence that it happened after Christianity's emergence in the West.
So are you claiming that people are dying for what they, even if they knew something was a lie, you're saying that people are willing to die for a lie? That's what you're saying?
No, I do not say that. I say people die for what they believe is true.
Right.
That is why.
So you're just reiterating my point.
I understand.
Correct.
You're a Christian, right? Yes, but you do know that there have been Muslim and Hindu martyrs and martyrs across the world who have suffered either through other religions or even Christian persecution.
Sure.
Would you say they died for something that obviously was a lie?
No, nobody said that. But you're going off topic. I don't even know what you're even. Well, first of all, here let me stop you right there, because you're making a lot of points that I wrote down, but you're essentially just parroting what I already said. And then you're saying things like, the lots of scholars or the consensus was, and it's completely false, right? Now, what you're doing is you're conflating martyrdom.
Completely
Hold
false.
up, I'm going to explain it to you, all right? Because essentially what you did was you're reciting back what I said, right? And then you're just kind of saying, but that happens other places. Let me explain the difference to you, right? You are conflating martyrdom in general with what makes the Christian martyrdom uniquely powerful as historical evidence, right? Now, you are 100% correct that Muslims and Hindus and other people have died for their beliefs, right? But you're completely missing the point. Christians didn't just die for what they believed, they died for what they claimed to have seen, right? So you are shifting categorically, which is why I stopped you. Now, you talked about this consensus of scholars, which again, I love when people say, because it's never true, right? Let's talk about Mr. Craig Evans, who is a respected New Testament scholar who explains, and quote, I'm going to read to you exactly what he said. What makes the martyrdom of the apostles unique is that they were not dying for secondhand faith. They were dying for what they said they saw, the risen Christ, end quote. If you want the source for that, read Jesus and the Manuscript, which was written in 2020. Now, if they were lying, they know that they were dying for a lie. People do not endure torture and execution for something they know they made up, right? What you're trying to do is you're trying to equate other people who have died for other religions because they were killed simply because they were Muslim or because they were Hindu. They couldn't control that anyway, but they didn't voluntarily say, I'm going to die and I'm going to continue to affirm that I saw the risen Christ. None of them can say that they saw Krishna. None of them can say that they encountered Muhammad or Jibreel or Allah. That's not what we're talking about. This is why I told you what you were doing was a category error, because martyrdom in other religions is not the same martyrdom as the apostles and the Christians that were killed early on for worshiping Jesus as God before a single line of the Bible had even been canonized. Now, if these people were lying, they know they were dying for a lie, like I said to you earlier, right? That's why Sean McDowell, who has a PhD in martyrdom studies, spent years researching this and concluded that while not all the apostles' deaths are equally verifiable, at least 6 to 7 deaths like Peter, Paul, and James are historically supported and tied directly to their resurrection testimony. If you want a source for that, look at The Fate of the Apostles, which was written in 2015. Now, I love this is my favorite thing that atheists do when you were talking about eyewitnesses, right? Because eyewitness testimony only matters when you guys think it should. If you're looking at history books or things that you guys think are things that people should look at as sources, then all of a sudden people's knowledge and eyewitness testimony is valuable to you. But when it's something you disagree with, then all of a sudden eyewitness testimony should be thrown out and is unreliable, which is complete hogwash, okay? And you said that the eyewitness testimonies were just claims from the disciples. Again, completely inaccurate, right? Those are not isolated claims in a vacuum. They're claims that were recorded and in early, multiply attested sources, all right? Paul's creed in 1 Corinthians 15, 3-7 is dated by most scholars, even skeptics like Bart Ehrman and atheist Gerd Luhmann, to within 3 to 5 years after the crucifixion. Ehrman said when he was looking into this himself, and quote, mind you, he's an atheist like you, Paul received this creed very soon after Jesus' death, probably within 1 to 2 years. This is how we know the resurrection claims were not a late legend. What is the source for that? Did Jesus exist in 2012? So no, my friend, I'm sorry to tell you that these aren't just vague claims. And that's why I stopped you when I did, because you claimed that there was a consensus somewhere that people said that what you were saying is true. Absolutely false and categorically in error on your side. Now, I'll give you a chance to make one more statement and I'm going to move on because, like I said, Da Vinci has been very, very, very patient. So go ahead, brother. And you're going to have to turn my stream down in the background because I'm hearing like a feedback and it is very distracting.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, I hear you, but I'm hearing you. You have me on some speakers, and I can kind of hear my voice coming through. It's like a hum or something. Very distracting.
Oh, all right. So I just want to say there's been a lot of confusion here. You've been saying I mentioned consensus in the idea that majority of historians do not support the consensus idea that the Gospels were an eyewitness account thing. Most of the Gospels, historically speaking, are dated to centuries after Jesus' death. The authorship is dated to
Wait, you said how many centuries? Say that again. Stop. What? Say that again. You said the Gospels were what?
The Gospels, you had claimed that the Gospels were written by eyewitness accounts, if I said you correctly.
Eyewitness, right? Okay, and
Yes. But that is not the case based on the historical evidence.
what historical evidence? What historical evidence? Okay. So here, I'm gonna hold you to a standard. No, I'm not gonna hold that. I want you. You said now. Here's the thing. When I give you rebuttals, I give you the respect.
I called to explain my point.
I understand that. I'm going to give you a prerequisite before you move on, because I don't want you to waste your time. You continue to claim that what I said is counterfactual to what evidence. So what you are going to do, just like I give you the respect of doing, is you're going to provide the evidence that you supposedly have, instead of just saying, like you did earlier, that that's not what history says. I don't care what you say history says. I expect you to have the sources ready when you are quoting them, like I have had the respect for you to do and for my audience. What is your evidence that what you're saying is true?
Oh, all right. So let me start with my claim about the gospel authorship, right? My claim about the gospel authorship is that the gospels were not written by the disciples, being Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Rather, they were a product of anonymous authorship and written by unknown people within 60 to 110 CE.
What is your evidence for that?
The typewriting has been writings of people like Dr. Herman, Dr. Duke of Tiba, and coincidentally, the very first manuscript of Mark. The very first manuscript of Mark on the page, as seen, has no single author mentioned. Every single early manuscript does not have an author mentioned.
Okay, so let's stop right. Let's stop right there. Let's stop right there. Well, we're gonna stop right there for a second, okay? Because this to me is honestly one of the things that when people say it, it just goes to show that you guys are all reading from the same playbook, and it is absolutely horribly disingenuous, right? Your claim that the Gospels were not written by the eyewitnesses and are anonymous is 1000% false, right? The argument that the Gospels were anonymous comes primarily from Bart Ehrman, but even Bart Ehrman himself admitted that the titles were attached very early on, which of course you skipped over, or either that or didn't have it in wherever you searched it, right? The earliest complete manuscripts of the Gospels we have, the Codex Sinaiticus, was dated to 325 AD, and Codex Vaticanus from 300 AD, all include the traditional names, all of them, okay? They all include the traditional names, Katamation and Katamarkan, etc. Meaning, according to Matthew, according to Mark, these titles were not added centuries later. They were already attributed, right? As a matter of fact, if we're going to look at another historian, someone who actually studied it and was being honest about it, you can look at somebody named Martin Hengel, who writes the uniformity of the gospel titles across all manuscript traditions points to a strong and early tradition of attribution. The source is the 4 Gospels and the 1 Gospel of Jesus Christ, which was written 25 years ago in the year 2000. Now, if these were anonymous for over a century, how did every copy in every region accidentally end up with the exact same attributions? That's not how anonymous texts work. So I'm going to hold your feet to the fire right there, Joy Boy. I want you to answer that question and only that question. I don't want you to pivot. I don't want you to waffle. I'm going to ask that question very slowly, and I want you to explain to me how, if the original Gospels were anonymous for over a century or longer, how did every copy in every region, from Arabia all the way to Spain to Northern Africa to Southern Europe, how did they all end up with the exact same attributions of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? How? Explain that to me. You're muted. I don't know if you're talking, but you muted yourself. Hello? Joy Boy. Okay. Yeah, now you are. So again, I'm going to ask the question again because I don't know if you heard me. If the Gospels were anonymous, as you falsely claimed, then how did every copy in the region, you have to turn my stream down in the background. That is very distracting. Okay. If every copy of the New Testament Gospels were anonymous for over a century, then how did every copy in every single region, which was spanning by that time hundreds of thousands of square miles, spanning 3 different continents, how did every single copy accidentally end up with the exact same attributions of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John for every single copy? How? Tell me how. They were anonymous according to you and according to Bart Ehrman. Except that you didn't say everything that Bart Ehrman said. You're only saying what the part that Bart Ehrman said that agrees with you. Okay? Now, how did every copy end up with the same attributions? Tell me.
Right, I'll jump into it because the stanch that you mentioned, the Codex, Sinaiticus, and Codex, you mentioned the manuscripts that were dated far later than the earliest. The earliest manuscripts that is dated is P52, the very first copy of John, and it doesn't have. That is the earliest known manuscript that does not have authorship. The one that you have mentioned, the two manuscripts that are dated, were dated to the 2nd century. This is around the time when the church fathers.
Okay, brother, Joy Boy. That is not what I asked you. But that's not what I asked you. I asked you a simple question. I asked you one simple question, okay? I didn't ask you to go over the manuscript history. I asked you, how could they have all been attributed to the same people from as early as we were? Because let me explain something to you. They were already attributed to the right authors, no matter where you found them, anywhere from Spain all the way to Arabia, to Nigeria, to Ethiopia, to Southern Europe. What I'm asking you is, if they were anonymous, then how was it that everyone who had copies, which was tens of thousands by then, already knew who the authors were? That's all I want you to answer.
To educate you on what is happening here, the earliest church manuscripts of authorship was divided around the 1st to 2nd century. This is when now biblical and Christian doctrine had now began to really come flushed out. This is when theology was formed, and based on scholarly consensus, actually based on the evidence, it seems these authorships and discussions were happening across the Christian world at that time, which is, as you've mentioned, Africa, Eastern Europe, and those many places. These authorship was then spread out due to these discussions held by church leaders. It wasn't because it was found in the earliest manuscript that you get alluded to.
All right, okay, brother. Hold on, stop. So you didn't answer the question. What you're doing is hold on, stop. Because what you're doing is you're spitballing here. Right? You're not giving any proof that this is actually what happened. You're just saying it. Okay. So first of all, you claim that the P52 is the earliest man. And this is the last thing I'll say to you, Joy Boy, because I've asked you several times to turn my stream down in the background. I don't know why you refuse to do so, but I'm hearing you and I'm hearing a very muffled, very loud, very distracting sound. And I don't understand, what it is, but you claim that the P52 is the earliest manuscript and it doesn't mention authorship. So therefore, John's gospel isn't reliably attributed. That's what you said. Now, I won't even get into how much of a red herring that is, right? Because the P52, which was dated to around 125 AD, is a tiny fragment of John chapter 18. Okay. So of course it doesn't mention authorship because it's part of a dialogue between Jesus and Pilate. It's not the title page. So you don't judge authorship. You don't judge authorship from a 3-inch scrap that because it doesn't have a name tag on it. This is what drives me insane, is how incredibly intellectually dishonest people can be when they say stuff like this, right? That's like you finding a ripped paragraph from a Hemingway novel and pretending that it disproves that he wrote it. It's absolutely bonkers that you would even try to make such a correlation. Now, the earliest complete manuscripts like Codex Sinaiticus, which is circa 325 AD, and Codex Vaticanus, which was from the early 4th century, do include titles such as the Gospel according to John and the Greek, and I'll give you the Greek if you want to, and these headings were not editorial additions centuries later. They were consistent across independent manuscript traditions, which I've already established there were tens of thousands of. And again, unlike my friend here, unlike my opponent, I'm going to tell you guys who to reference. I want you guys to look at Dr. Charles E. Hill's work on who chose the Gospels, okay? And that was from the Oxford University Press, where he explains how the titles were standard and widespread by the 2nd century, which again, Joy Boy tried to pretend like it wasn't. But you also implied that the authorship traditions didn't arise until the late 2nd century debates. Again, a huge lie. Irenaeus of Lyons, who was writing around 180 AD, explicitly names all 4 Gospels and attributes them to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in Against Heresies, Book 3, Chapter 1. He was not creating doctrine. He was repeating what was already taught to him by Polycarp, who himself was a disciple of John the Apostle, which Jaguar, the Muslim earlier stated, was a different John than the one who was exiled to the island of Patmos, which, if nothing else, was at least a great comedy stint here, right? But these discussions that across the Christian world weren't debates about authorship. They were defenses of the already accepted authorship against heretical Gnostic forgeries like the Gospel of Thomas. Okay, that's what those meetings were about. And by the mid-2nd century, Justin Martyr, around 150 AD, refers to the Gospels as the memoirs of the apostles, which is plural, consistent, and known. So I'm sorry, Joy Boy. The reason that I'm being that way is because I asked you to give proof when you spoke. I integrate the proof in and I tell people what to look up because these are the things that I have looked up. These are the things that I have become familiar with. And when you make claims and say, well, the church fathers did X, Y, and Z. So basically what your claim is that the early church fathers across hundreds of thousands of square miles played a game of telephone until the point where all of the gospels had the same author attributions. You know why that doesn't work? Because it didn't even work with the Quran, when they couldn't even agree about what should go in that. And they were all in the same region. But you're saying that gospels and manuscripts that had spread out across tens of thousands of square miles, across 3 different continents, you expect everyone to believe that they were able to magically just attest the same gospels to the same people and nobody had a problem with that if there was any heresy involved? Absolutely bonkers, man. Thanks for coming in, but don't hit your head on the way out, brother. Love you, but I pray that God opens your eyes and you see the truth. Holy goodness gracious.